unmute myself, and we're all systems go. We're just waiting for people to come up now. So we've done it, Carlos, irrespective of my clumsiness at the stuff. So what do you think? Are we safe? Okay. Carlos is telling me well done. So we're just waiting for people to come up now. This is our first evening of the Iron John story, Rites of Passage in Johannesburg in 2020. That's R-I-T-E-S, Rites, not R-I-G-H-T-S, which is another sort of rite. So we're just waiting now. That's what we shall do, just wait. Ah, there's Frank. Hello, Frank.
Hello.
How are you this evening?
Is there no one else on?
Not yet. Not yet. This is South Africa. That's not. This is just how it rolls here. How have you been?
I've been well. I've been better. I had to have a cystectomy done. I've been peeing every hour and a half, and so I had to go to a urologist, and he did a couple of exams on me and gave me some pills that I hope are going to help out. But I don't know if you know medical stuff, but he had to put a probe up my penis into my bladder and take a look at my prostate. My prostate is squeezing my aorta, which is what you pee through, and that's what's keeping my bladder 40% full.
Yeah.
When I pee, yeah, I'm not peeing everything out. So anyway.
So we are recording this.
Oh no. Why? There's nobody here yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was a mission to set it up. So.
Well, I was gonna say shut it off and start it over.
Yeah.
A warning would have been nice.
Yeah, I had the same operation at TERPS, transurethral something or other. Anyway, it worked quite well.
A Eurolift?
Yeah. Hello, Carlos. You're muted, Carlos.
Hi, Sam. Hello, Frank.
Hi, Carlos.
So are we streaming on Facebook? It says live, but I don't see my head moving over there.
Oh yeah, is it on Facebook? What's the name?
MKP Men is the group.
Yeah, it's on Facebook.
Is
And
it?
there's two people live on Facebook, it says.
Okay.
Go, Frank. The link's in the chat.
Thanks, Carlos.
Oh, I'm already there searching for it. They changed this. I used to have a bunch of groups listed, and now they only show 3 of them. I don't know why that changed. No. Oh yeah, here it is. MKP Men by Ray Z. I don't know if this is the right site.
South Africa, MKP Men on Facebook. Just says MKP Men on my.
This is Bag of Men, MKP Men Clothing Stores, MK Watch Laguna. I don't see the group. MKP, is it just MKP Men? That's it.
Yeah, capital MKP, capital M and small EN.
MKP Men. No. I don't know, maybe you got different channels over there or something.
And Frank, if you use the link in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going back there now. I was already over in my search engine.
Oh, I see.
Now I'm coming back here. Oh, I see. It's a whole big link. It's not just MKP Men. Yeah, that'll probably work a whole lot better. Copy.
Who's got peacocks? You've got peacocks, Frank.
Say what?
Peacocks in the background. Was that Carlos's peacocks?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. A bit late for them. The sun's already gone down.
I guess so. I don't know. They're quite vocal at all times, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's 5:05. I suppose we should start then, because anybody who comes along now is a little bit late. Yeah. So I wanted to read this passage about why rites of passage are important. Well, I want to read 2 passages. So I wanted to begin with this one. This one is a man called Two Bears is talking. 2 bears belong to a tribe which disappeared, and we don't even know his name now. So it goes like this. Are you ready? You need to nod.
Yes.
All people think they are forever. All people think they are forever. They do not think that they will ever not be. We were like that. We did not think we could be eradicated. You believe this of yourselves, that you will survive forever. Nothing can destroy you, could wipe you from the face of the earth and from history so completely that all will remain is your name, and not even that will be known with certainty. Such faith have you in your invulnerability. Yet already your destruction begins. It comes upon you gradually in little ways. Bit by bit, your belief in yourselves erodes. A growing cynicism pervades your life. Small acts of kindness and charity are abandoned as pointless and somehow indicative of weakness. Little failures of behavior lead to bigger ones. And it is not enough to ignore the discourtesies of others. Discourtesies must be repaid in kind. Men are intolerant and judgmental. They are without grace. And if one man proclaims that God has spoken to him, another quickly proclaims that that God of his is false. If the homeless cannot find shelter, then surely they are to blame for their condition. If the poor do not have jobs, then surely it is because they will not work. If sickness downs those whose lifestyle differs from our own, then surely they have brought it upon themselves. Look at your people. You abandon your old and you shun your sick. You cast off your children and decry any who are different. They commit acts of unfaithfulness, betrayal, and depravity every day. They foster lies that undermine belief. Each small pettiness and greed breeds others. A sense of futility consumes them, and they feel helpless to affect even the smallest changes. Their madness is of their own making, and yet they are powerless against it because they refuse to acknowledge its source. They are at war with themselves, but do not understand the nature of the battle being fought. Hello, Sean. Do even a handful believe that life is better now than 20 years ago? Do they believe that the dark things that inhabit it are less threatening? Do they feel safer in their homes and cities? Do they find honor and compassion outweighs greed, deceit, and disdain? Can you tell me that you do not fear for them? We do not always recognize the things that come to destroy us. So that's a sort of statement of where we are, perhaps, in our modern world. There's a huge generalization anyway. Who else is here? Hello, Sean. Sean and Jane. Is Jane with you?
Hi, Sean.
Hi, guys. No, Jane's not with me yet. She'll join us just now.
Okay. So, because we're going into the Iron John story and unconscious initiation story, which it is, because it didn't start off as a conscious initiation. We need a little bit of background. So I wanted to read this other part here, and then a poem, and then we'll start. And this was by James Hillman, and it's called "When the Father is Absent." The missing father is not your or my personal father. He is the absent father of our culture, the viable Senex, who provides not only daily bread, but spirit through meaning and order. The missing father is the dead God who offered a focus for spiritual things. Without this focus, we turn to dreams and oracles rather than to prayer, code, and tradition and ritual. When mother replaces father, magic as substitutes for logos, and the sun priests contaminate the pure spirit. So for those of us in MKP, we understand that we're talking about the direction of above, right? Because we're talking about logos. Unable to go backwards to retrieve the dead father of tradition, we go downwards now into the mother of the collective unconscious, seeking an all-embracing comprehension. We ask for help getting through the narrow straits without harm. The sun, what's in vulnerability, grant us foreknowledge and protection. Our prayer is to the night for a dream, to a love for understanding, to a little rite or an exercise for a moment of wisdom. Above all, we want assurance through a vision beforehand that it will all come out all right. Without the Father, we lose the capacity which the church recognized as this discrimination of spirits. The ability to know a call when we hear one and to discriminate between the voices. The mother encourages the son to go ahead, embrace all. For her, all equals everything. The father's instruction, on the contrary, is all equals nothing unless be precisely discriminated. So already in that piece, we have the two parts of the axis mundi, the feminine below and the father and the logos above. And hopefully we stand in between there. So I wanted to read this poem by David White, and then we'll start with the story. Okay, nodding of heads would be good. Mark, I can't see your head nodding because you've just got a photograph. And hello, Francois. Nodding of head. Thank you, Francois. Everything is waiting for you. Everything is waiting for you. Your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone. Your great mistake is to act the drama as though you were alone, as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. That's a tricky one, huh? To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. So when we say, oh, all my relations, we can't be alone, can we? We can feel alone, but we can't be alone. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way that the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentors of things to come. The doors have always been there. The doors have always been there and invite you. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you, and the tiny speaker in your phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into conversation. That's a good thought. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness on the shelf and sees all good things in you at last. The birds and the creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. So I think that's enough of that. So I thought we'd do the story right through. You think that's a good idea? Yes? Nodding of heads.
What did you say? Do the story as two?
Right through. All the way through. All the way through. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. So you know how good stories start, right? Anybody? This is not a rhetorical question.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time. Once upon a time.
Before time was kept on your wrist.
Once before time was captured and put on town hall clocks. So what does this thing about time mean? Because sometimes it's really important to understand the context of the story. We understand, do we, that we can only experience time in the material world. Once we step outside of the material world, we step into eternity. So if you want to experience time, you have to incarnate on the planet Earth, it seems, or somewhere in our manifest universe. And then we suffer from the punishments of time once we're here. Yeah, I must turn it a little bit too. Find the sweet spot. So once upon a time, the story says, once in that time, once before time was made digital and put on the town hall clock, once before there was a time for compound interest, once before there was a time for mortgage payments, a time for boys and a time for girls, a time to clock on and a time to clock off, once in that time. Once in that time, and the story also talks about a different geography. Because if we're leaving our time now, then we're not in our world anymore. And so we have to say something like just over south and in between east and just through west and just under north. And we also honor the fifth direction, the vertical one, the one that we just spoke about, the one that joins us all together here tonight. So we're going to go on a journey with the sound of the drum, and the drum is going to carry us to the other worlds. And the story begins, once upon a time, there was a king who had a castle and he lived next to an enormous forest. Is that drum coming over all right? Is that okay? Okay, sweet, thank you. Sound check. So the narrative says one day the king was feeling hungry. He had a hunger for something that was wild. So he sent a hunter out into the forest to shoot him a doe or a deer or something. And the hunter never returned. So he didn't know what to do. He didn't get his supper and he'd lost a hunter. So he sent out two hunters to find the first hunter. And they didn't return. What to do, what to do, what to do. You know how humans are. He sent out 4 hunters to find the other 2. and they didn't return. So he kept doubling down or doubling up, and eventually he got frustrated with the whole process. He didn't send out any more hunters, and the forest got a reputation of being a bad place because people disappeared in that forest. So if that had been in Johannesburg in 2020, the health and safety people would have probably gone out there with hazmat suits and barrier tape and taped off the forests and put up signage so nobody would go into the forest. So, you know, in that story, there was just rumors, which is much more powerful. The forest is dangerous, don't go there. So that's how that was. For a short time or a long time. So the king had a young son. And all of this time that was waiting and going past, the son was growing up, and the son got to be about 7 years old. And then a wonderful thing happened. The son was playing with his golden ball at the bottom of the throne. The king was sitting there, and in walked in a wild-looking man dressed in animal skins. Very strange uniform. And he addressed himself to the king, and he said, "Is there anything dangerous to do around here?" And the king said, "Well, there is the forest, but I don't recommend it because the return rate is not good." He said, "Well, that's just exactly the sort of thing that I love. I think I'll give it a whirl." So this adventurer, he had a little dog with him, and the dog and a boy, of course, were having a conversation on the floor. And so the hunter decided, the adventurer, however you want to call him, he decided to go into the forest and see what was going on there. And as he turned to leave, he looked at the boy and he winked at the boy. So if we were that young boy, what would we understand by this conspiratorial wink? We've been seen. We've been acknowledged. And there's a private communication going on between the hunter and the young boy, which the king is not privy to. So that's how that was. The hunter goes into the forest, and the narrative said that the hunter had hardly gone 2 strides when the dog set up a barking at a pond, and an arm reached out of the pond and pulled the dog into the pond. A big, hairy arm. What to do, what to do, what to do. So the hunter went back to the castle and he said, "I need a few men and buckets. I need to rescue my dog." So they went back to the pond and they began to bucket the pond out. And what do you think they found there? They found a rusty looking, hairy, dirty, smelly man. You know what a wet dog smells like? Probably worse than a cross between a wet dog and dirty socks. I see Francois knows that smell. So they chained that wild man up. They chained him up with chains. Why with chains? Because iron chains were the strongest thing that they knew at the time that the story was written. Well, in the sort of the time frame that the story was written. We'll get back to that later. So they dragged Iron John back to the court, to the castle. And they set him in the courtyard, and the king said, okay, well, and the queen said, no, you must put him in an iron cage. We can't have all of that wild, creative, overtly sexual energy running around the castle. Put him in an iron cage in the courtyard so we know where he is. So that's how that was. They put Iron John into the cage, which is why he's called Iron John, of course. So the narrative says the young boy was playing with his golden ball. That golden ball we have when we're born that we think we're never going to lose. That golden ball of connection to soul and to nature. When we are a whole person. Because the story has to go forward, the golden ball has to roll into the iron cage. Because that's where it belongs. And we'll get to the why of that later. So the golden ball rolls into the cage. Oh shit. What to do, what to do, what to do. So the young boy goes to the wild man's cage. His knees are probably knocking quite a lot because there's a lot of rumors about what this wild man is. You know, he eats young children. If you don't go to bed when you're told to, he's the boogeyman in the cupboard. The wild man in the cage will get you. So he says to the wild man, can I have my ball back? Can I have my ball back? And the wild man tells him a truth. And a recognition at the same time. Because it's really important that we hear the wild man's words. He speaks a truth to the young boy. He said, yes, you can have your ball back if you let me out of the cage. Yes, you can have your ball back if you let me out of the cage. So as a young boy, we said, no, we can't do that. My father's forbidden it. End of story, can't do that. So the next day, we're still missing our golden ball. We go back to the cage and we ask the same question. Can I have my ball back, please? The wild man answers with the same truth. Yes. Yes, you can have your ball back if you can let me out of the cage. No, I can't do that because mother would have a cadenza. I can't go against mum. She's strictly forbidden me to let you out of the cage. Anybody? So the narrative says on the third day, and there's all sorts of interpretation we could make about what these different days mean, but I don't want to go there right now. I want to carry on with the story. So on the third day, he goes back to the cage and he asks the same question. Can I have my ball back, please? And the wild man says the truth again. Yes, you can have your ball back if you let me out of the cage. So we say to the wild man, well, even if I wanted to let you out of the cage, I don't know where the key is. And the wild man says, it's under your mother's pillow. It's under your mother's pillow. Right where Freud said it would be. What to do, what to do, what to do, because now we have to go into the bedchamber of our parents, that taboo place that we never enter. And we have to steal the key from under our mother's pillow. So it was fortunate, the narrative said, that the next day the parents were away. It's always good to do this key stealing thing when the parents are away. Makes it a little bit easier. It's like taking the family car for a joyride, and it's easier if the parents aren't there. So we go into the bedroom of our parents, and we feel under the pillow, and sure enough, there's the key. Are you leaving us, Carlos?
The Grace family has joined us.
Ah, okay. Yes. Hello, Grace family. Yeah, thank you, Carlos.
Yeah, this is Benjamin from Accra, Ghana.
Hello. Hello.
I'm fine.
Good.
Welcome.
Welcome. Anyway, we're in the middle of the story, so we're just going to carry on. Okay, thanks. Okay. So we have the key now. So now we come to an important decision, because we have the key to the wild man's cage.
Okay.
So what are we going to do now? Because if we put the key in the lock, everything changes, right? Because if our parents come home and discover the wild man is not in the cage, there's going to be hell to pay. What to do, what to do, what to do. So this is a big step in our lives, because if we have the key to unlock the wild man's cage, we have to be ready and willing to turn the key. We have to have skin in the game. In a way, it's another way of saying you have to be prepared to die to live. So we have to be prepared to die to who we were as a young boy, to get the wild man out of the cage, because we want our golden ball back. Remember what our question was? Can I have my golden ball back? So the question is, were we talking about the ball, or are we talking about what it represents? Yeah, still full. Because the golden ball represents our soul. The golden ball represents that inner child. The one that left us sometime as the ego began to develop, and we have to fulfill the requirements of the status quo, which is the old king in the castle. So if we feel the loss of this golden ball and we want it back, then we have to do what the wild man says. Can I have my ball back? Yes. But you have to let me out of the cage. So we need to understand a little bit further down in the story, after the story, what that actually means. Let the wild man out of the cage. So we approach the cage with the key, and we put the key in the lock, but the key won't turn. And we struggle, and we struggle, and we struggle, and eventually we skin our fingers on the edge of the key, and our fingers begin to bleed, and the blood runs down the shaft of the key and into the lock. And our blood. Remember I said you had to have skin in the game? Our blood goes into the lock and lubricates the lock, and the lock snaps open, and out comes the wild man. He hands us back our golden ball, and he turns to leave. And then we say a really courageous thing at that point. The narrative said a really courageous thing. Wait. Wait. If my parents come home and find you gone out of the cage, I'm going to be in deep shit, and that's only an estimate. And Iron John says, yes, I think you're right. You better come with me. So he lifts us up and he puts us on his shoulders, and he strides off to the enormous forest, which has been renamed in the meantime the Dark and Dangerous Forest. And he takes us to a pond, a golden pond, and he lays us down beside the pond, and he makes a bed out of moss and leaves and ferns. And he goes into the forest and he collects some honey and some nuts and some fruit. And he comes back and he gives us something to eat, some nourishment from the wildness of the forest. And he said, you can stay with me, but you have to follow my instructions. Tomorrow I'm going to give you a task. So sleep tonight, and we'll talk in the morning. So that's how that was. Next day, the wild man strides in and he says, you see this pond here? Look into the pond and you can see golden fish and golden eels and everything. He says, nothing must defile the pond. Pay careful attention to the words that he uses here. He said, nothing must defile the pond. So the narrative translates that as don't let anything fall into the pond. So there we are, we're sitting next to the pond. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to go tadpoling when you were young, to live next to a stream and water and splash around at the edge of the pond. There's all of this fantastic life going on there. Little boatmen walking across the surface tension of the water, and frogs spawning, and tadpoles wriggling, and dragonflies and birds, and deer coming down to drink, and all sorts of little animals running around. The whole place is just teeming with life and vibrancy. It is the place of below, of undifferentiated unity of the feminine in its best form. Anyway, the narrative says about 2 o'clock, our finger began to throb. You know, if you've ever jammed your finger in the car door, you know what that's like. When the blood starts to pump through your finger, it throbs. About 2 o'clock, we lost concentration and we put our finger in the water. Zing! The whole finger turned to gold. Shit. What to do? So we don't know what to do, so we hide our finger. About 4 o'clock, the wild man comes striding in and he said, what happened at 2 o'clock? No, nothing. You know, we went straight into denial. Yeah. Like the child with the chocolate cake on its face. No, it wasn't me. No, nothing happened. He said, I felt something fall into the pond at about 2 o'clock. He said, it's not serious, but it mustn't happen again. So tomorrow, I'll give you another task. So tomorrow came, the second day at the pond. And the wild man says, okay, same rule applies. Nothing must defile the pond. Guard the pond. So there we are, guarding the pond for all of our worth. So we're making sure that our finger doesn't go anywhere near the pond, but our finger's still hurting and throbbing. So we run our fingers through our hair. And what happens? A single hair falls into the pond. Sing! Turns to gold. Oh, shit. What to do, what to do, what to do. Okay, well, put it in our pocket quickly and pretend it didn't happen. Humans are good at that, you know. Anyway, about 4 o'clock, the wild man comes striding in and he says, I felt something fall into the pond. At about 2 o'clock, he said, it's not too serious, but if it happens again, you'll have to leave me. Anyway, he said, tomorrow we'll have another try and see if you can do what I ask. So on the third day, we're guarding the pond for all of our worth, making sure our fingers don't go into the water, making sure that nothing falls out of our head into the water. At about 2 o'clock, though, we notice something different in the pond. And we look into the pond and we can see a face. We sort of recognize the face, it's our face. And so we lean further and further over into the pond and we see ourselves as we truly are. Stripped of all of those theories and opinions and beliefs that were overlaid onto us. By our parents' expectations, the expectations of the culture that we grew up in, the expectations of the status quo. We look into the pond and we see somebody looking back at us, the one who owns the golden ball. And we lean so far over into the pond that our whole head of hair falls over our shoulders and into the pond, and it all turns to gold. Oh, shit. This is serious shit now, hey? Because there's no hiding a whole head of hair. So we take our bandana or our handkerchief or whatever that is, and we try to hide our golden hair. The wild man comes striding in about 4 o'clock. He says, I felt something fall into the pond at about 2 o'clock again. He said, in itself, it's not that serious, but you can't stay with me anymore. So tomorrow you must leave me. But in the meantime, we'll have one last meal tonight. And then we'll have a little bit of conversation in the morning. And then you'll have to leave. So that's how that was. And that's the sort of the end of the first part of the story. So I don't know if we want to stop the story there and talk a little bit about it, or do we want to go on to the end? I'm ready to do either. But if we stop the story, we'll probably never get to the second part this evening. So, because there's a lot to unpack here. So, raise your hands if you want to go to the second part of the story. Second part, second part, second part, second part, second part, second part, second part it is. Okay. I'm just going to have a slurp of no sugar Coke. So next morning, the wild man strides in and he said, "You must leave me now." Said, "You know a lot about gold now. We spent 3 days at the Golden Pond. You know a lot about gold. And in a way, because you're the son of a king, you know a lot about gold from the way that you were brought up. The one thing that you don't know, that you need to learn yet, is you need to learn about poverty. You need to learn about poverty. And I don't think he's talking about a financial poverty here. I think he's talking about a spiritual poverty or a soul poverty. So my own understanding of this part of the story is that this all happened outside of our world. And we had to travel down the road less traveled. And the image that always comes to my mind when I talk about this part of this story is that that's the birth canal. And we get born into a physical body in this world. And that's why that's how we're going to learn about poverty. In this world, we're going to learn about poverty. So the narrative said he traveled down the road less traveled, and he got odd jobs here and odd jobs there, and he helped people over there, and he was a cook in Australia, and he shore sheep on a station in the middle of New South Wales somewhere, and he was a restaurant cook at night and a seaman, and he traveled around and he learned the ways of the world. Without any money, without any means of support, without any support structure, he made his own way. So eventually the story says, the narrative says, he came to a castle and he asked if there was any work there. And I should have mentioned that all of this time he kept his hair covered so nobody could see his golden hair. So the cook of the castle offered him a job cutting wood and keeping the fire going. And so that's how that was. He was working in the kitchen. He was doing kitchen work. So in the sort of the esoteric traditions, we understand that kitchen work has a particular meaning. But we'll go into that later. Anyway, one day the king sent down to the cook and he says, "I want a plate of little dainty pastries for my afternoon tea. Send them up." I don't know how he did that. Maybe he had one of those speaking tubes that goes from the king's chamber down to the engine room. "Hello, send up pastry." I don't know how that went. Anyway, there wasn't anybody around, so they sent us, because we're the young man with the golden hair, they sent us up to the king's chamber with the pastries. And The king says to us, take off your hat. It's not polite to be in the presence of the king, and cover your hair. So we have to understand here that timing is everything. Timing is absolutely everything, and it's not time to reveal who we are. And so we say, I can't take my hat off because I've got the mange. So the king was really furious, wasn't he? And he shouts down to the cook through his speaking tube, why do you send that guy up here? He's got the mange. Get rid of him. Oh shit, unemployed again. Anyway, the cook was quite friendly towards us and said to the gardener, you know, don't you have a job for this guy over there in the garden? So the gardener said, yeah, I could do with some help. So over there we go to the garden. Do you know this garden in the middle of the castle? This is a really special place. In the sort of Eastern traditions, it's called the perfume garden. It's the walled garden within the castle where the women of the castle can be free to roam, and there's birds and peacocks. Who's got peacocks? Carlos has got peacocks. There's peacocks there. And ponds and trees and shade, and it's a place where the women are safe, where the feminine is safe. And so there we are. Remember, we know a lot about gold now. We know how to plant. We know how to make flowers grow, because we learned all of that with the wild man in the forest at our first day at the pond. We should remember that a day in the life of a story like this can be 15 or 20 years. It's not 24-hour day. It's a period of time. When we use the word day, we're talking about a period of time. It can be as long as it takes. For a short time or a long time, or however long time that takes. So there we are. We're working in the secret garden now, in the perfume garden. And it's really hot. The narrative says it's really hot. And so in order to cool ourselves off, we take our hat off to wipe our brow with our hat. And the sun reflects off our golden hair, and it shimmers against the ceiling and the walls of the upstairs room where the princess stays. And she looks out the window to see what's creating that light, and she sees this young man down there with this head of golden hair. Probably had his shirt off, you know, so there was six-pack and rippling muscles and a sheen of sweat. I'm sure it was very erotic. So she sends down to the gardener and she says, bring me up a nosegay of flowers, a posy of flowers. So because we understand the wildness of the forest, we go and we collect a whole lot of wildflowers, and we're just about to take them up, and the gardener says, no, don't take those. They're just ordinary flowers. Take some of those exotic ones, those imported ones. And we say, no. These are the local flowers, and their smell is going to remain longer, and they're going to remain fresh longer. These are the right flowers for the princess. So up we go with the flowers. This is our second trip upstairs, right? If we're talking about climbing stairs, we need to understand that we're going to a higher level or a different level of consciousness and awareness. We're going up into the presence of the young feminine. So she takes the flowers and she says, take off your hat. It's not proper for you to wear your hat in my presence. And we said, no, I can't do that because we've got the mange. Anyway, she grabs our hat and she takes it off before we can do anything about it. And our whole head of golden hair falls over our shoulders. Anyway, she gives us some gold coins. We quickly put our hat back on and we go downstairs. And that's how that was. Our first meeting with a girl who loved gold. A really strange thing happens now. No, not strange. A really interesting thing happens now, because as soon as this event takes place, it triggers the next event in the story. So the narrative said that the kingdom became under attack from hostile forces. And so the king had to marshal his army and go out to fight the hostile forces before they overran the kingdom. And it wasn't going very well. So on the last day of the battle, we said, well, we can also go to battle. And they said, okay, we'll leave a horse for you in the stable. When we're gone, you can ride that horse. So when we got to the stable, we found a 3-legged horse. Well, it had 4 legs, but one leg didn't really work. So we rode the horse to the edge of the enormous forest. And we called out, Iron John, Iron John, Iron John. Like he told us to call if we needed him before we left. And so Iron John came out and he said, what do you need? We said, we need an army. I need a war horse and I need armor. The kingdom is under attack. Not a problem. And so we rode off to war. And our army set on the invaders. And the narrative says a really important thing here. The narrative said that the army chased down all the combatants and killed them, each and every one. So at the end of the battle, we went back to the forest and we called Iron John again. And he said, yeah, what do you want now? He said, no, I want to swap this lot out for my 3-legged horse. And so we went back to the castle on clippity-clop jig, clippity-clop jig, clippity-clop jig, clippity-clop jig. So there's a really interesting little detail in the story about what a 3-legged horse represents. And those of us who have ever done stage work or plays and everything will know that there's an expression just before a performance which says break a leg. So there's a connection between this horse with one faulty leg and breaking a leg and being aware perhaps of our incompleteness. Anyway, we'll go into that further a bit later. So we will go back to the castle. The king went into the The king went into the daughter's chamber and said, well, I don't know what happened today, but somebody came along and saved our asses. And then he disappeared. But if he hadn't have come along, we were in serious trouble, but everything is great now. And I think we need to have a games to celebrate. Said, I've got those 3 little golden apples down there in the treasury. I think we'll give them away as prizes. And maybe the one who saved us will come and indulge in the games and we'll find out who that is. And the daughter looks at the king and sort of half smiles and said, okay. You know how they do that? Okay. Do you hear that in the okay? She's got a other plan. She goes down to the gardener and she says, what happened yesterday during the battle? And where's the young guy? Oh no, he's there working in the garden. He went off on this 3-legged horse and everybody was jeered at him and made laugh and made fun of him. And when he came back, he said, well, if I hadn't have been there, things would have really gone differently. So, you know, I did my bit. And then she looked down and she saw the gardener's children were playing with some golden coins. And she said, where did they get those coins from? And she said, the gardener says, I don't know. He came back the other day when he took the flowers up and he had these gold coins and he gave them to my children to play with. I see. So next day it's the first day of the games, right? So everybody asked the young man, which was us, remember, are you going to the games? Yeah, no, I'll be there just in a little bit. I've just got some work to do, finish up here. I'll be there. Got to prune the roses or spray the aphids. So we took our 3-legged horse, clippity-clop, jig, clippity-clop, jig, clippity-clop, jig, clippity-clop, jig, and we went back to the enormous forest and we called out to Iron John. Iron John, Iron John, Iron John. I said, what do you need this time? No, I need a horse and some armor. I need to participate in these games. I need to catch the golden balls that the golden apples that the princess is going to throw. Iron John says, consider it already done. The apples are in your hand. So that was the way that was. He won all of the games, the jousts and whatever competitions they had. And then she threw one golden apple into the air and he caught it. We caught it. And we rode away. We went back to the forest and we swapped out the red horse for our clippity-cloppity jig 3-legged horse, and we rode back to the castle. Well, the king was a bit ticked off about this, wasn't it? Because he thought at least whoever caught the apple would lift their visor and show who they were. Anyway, the next day they decided to do the same thing again, so that's how that was. So we went back to the forest and we asked for another horse, and this time Iron John gave us a white horse. At the end of the day, having won all of the competitions, the young girl who loves gold threw the golden apple in the air and we caught it again and we rode off. Despite the king's protestation that we should reveal who we were. The king was pissed off, wasn't he? So back to the castle we went with our 3-legged horse. Everybody jeered and laughed. Said, well, what did you win today? You know, well, I was the best at many things. You know, yeah, right. Okay. So on the third day, we go back to the wild, enormous forest and we ask Iron John for a black horse. And so we ride into the games, and once again, we win all of the games. So the king says to his soldiers, whoever wins today, if he tries to escape, you chase him and you throw a spear at him or something. I want him brought back here. I want to see who this person is. So she throws a golden apple and we catch it and we ride off. But the king's men are in anticipation, and they sort of ambush us halfway down the road, and one of them throws a spear and it wounds us in the thigh as we ride off, just as we leap our horse over the last hedge and disappear into the enormous forest. So that night we ride the horse back. But now we're limping a little bit, right? So now we've got the limp and not the horse. Or maybe we're both limping. So the king and the daughter are having a conversation, and he said, you know, I'm really pissed off about this because we don't know who this person is. He just keeps coming in and leaving. I don't know who it is. And she said, just give me a day. I think I've got the answer to your problem. So the next day she goes down and she talks to the gardener, and she says, what happened the last 3 days with a young guy, with your new gardener? The gardener says, well, I don't know. He went out each day and he came back each day with the 3-legged horse. But he's given my children these 3 little golden apples to play with. I don't know where he got them from, but anyway. Now we know who's who in the zoo. So the next day, the daughter speaks to the king and she says, I think the person we're looking for is the gardener who works in the garden downstairs. I think you should call him up here. So they call us up. And this is really important. We get invited into the king's chamber. It's really important to be invited into the king's chamber, because if we attempt to enter the king's chamber before we're invited, we fall back into ashes and we fall back into the wasteland. So we'll unpack a little bit more about what that means later, but that's how it is. So we enter the king's chamber and he says, take off your hat. And we start to say the usual excuse, and she walks over to us and snatches the hat off our head, and the whole of our golden hair falls down. And she says to her father, this is the man who saved your kingdom. And this is the man who caught the 3 golden apples. So the king looks at us and he said, what do you have to say for yourself? So now the time is right. Timing is everything. The time is right. So we say, yes, it was me. So the king says, I'm in your debt. What can I give you to repay you? And our answer is, I want to marry your daughter. Give me your daughter to wife. And so she walks over and she kisses us. And so the wedding is organized and the wedding is had. And just as the wedding is about to take place, the doors open and in comes a king and a queen. Our own mother and father have come to the wedding. So there's a lot of rejoicing and hugging and everything. So when all of that settles down and we're just about to do the wedding again, the doors open again. And in comes another king with a huge retinue following him, with bearing gifts and fruit and food and honey and all the bounty of the forest. And so this king walks up to us and says, I am Iron John, and you have redeemed me through your actions, and you have broken the spell that the dark magician placed upon me, and so now I am free. So the wedding was celebrated. They celebrated that wedding for 2 weeks. Just to make sure it had actually happened, they celebrated it for another 2 weeks afterwards. The king asked his new son, his son-in-law, what he wanted for a present. And the son replied, I want dominion over all of the wild places. That's all I want. And I will go and live there with my queen. So for 2 weeks more, they celebrated that wedding. Lots of people were invited from this world. I was there myself. Elvis Presley was there, and Michael Jackson, and Aretha Franklin. Lots of luminaries were there. They gave me 2 bottles of wine when I left to bring back to this world. And when I took the cork out, it came out as a story that I have told you tonight. And that's actually the end of the story. Hey. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, where to start? Anybody would like to make a comment? Yeah, you'd have to unmute yourselves in order to make a comment. Ask a question. Ask for clarity.
I was trying to grab that last part where you said you left with 2 bottles of wine and something about the cork out.
When I pulled the cork out of the wine in this world, that came out as the stories that I tell.
Okay.
Things different, you know, things operate differently in different worlds. So in that world, it's wine, and in this world, that same substance is stories.
Yeah, people tend to tell stories when they have too much wine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So speak to me. I've been speaking for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Would be good if somebody else said something.
Sam, I just had an aha.
Uh-huh.
Like that, yes. And the thought occurred to me that Iron John actually represents the shadow. And being redeemed as the king that he is, with dominion over the wild places, is the right place to find the shadow. Can't say much more than this at this stage. I mean, but I just just to realize that that's a possibility, and it lots of possibilities in that.
Mm. So yeah, so that shadow, that's the golden ball that we lost, that rolled into the cage, and certainly it contains many things. And when we redeem the wild man, remember the question, can I have my ball back? He said, yes, if you let me out of the cage. So the whole story revolves around letting the wild man out of the cage. Even the very end at the wedding is a metaphorical description of letting the wild man out of the cage. When we marry the girl who loves gold, we are able to let the wild man finally out of the cage.
Well, out of his cage.
Yes.
And I love the image of the theme of gold throughout the whole story. And so the loss of the ball, but then the gradual recovery of gold, and then the theme of gold right throughout. It's a fascinating piece too.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting enchanted by it all. So at this stage, I don't want to break that enchantment, but those are the bits and pieces that I've got together at this stage.
Okay, great, super.
Never thought of it before.
Yeah, Sam,
This old
thank.
copy.
Yeah. Sorry, who was speaking? Mark?
Frank was talking about his book.
Yes, yes.
Oh, I thought I interrupted you, Mark. I'm sorry.
I interrupted you.
I have this old copy
Yeah.
of Iron John, and you know, I never knew where I saw this, but here it is, the difference between shame and guilt. It's back here in the book. There's so many good things here underlined. Makes me want to go back and read it all again.
Yeah. And you know, Robert Bly was just an absolute genius, because he would give away these throwaway lines. And it took me some years to understand some of his throwaway lines, like, your mother wanted a nice boy. And it sounds like just an off the cuff comment. And then when you unpack what that means, there's a whole pyramid under there, under that just one sentence. And your mother wanted a nice boy or a nice girl. And one of his other lines was, where would the key be? It's under your mother's pillow, right where Freud said it would be. Yes.
Yeah, Sam, thank you. I've sat here kind of spellbound, and I know the first half of the story from the weekend, and the second half was new to me in many ways. And I'm almost haven't got my thinking head on. I was just in the story and enjoying it, and I'm going to let it sink in if it sinks in. It's lovely. Thank you.
It will. It'll percolate. I love that image of the percolator, you know, the coffee one that goes bloop, 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 bloop,
Yeah.
bloop, bloop. It'll percolate over the next 3 or 4 weeks, or till before next Thursday evening, when we start to unpack each chapter one by one. Yeah. So thanks, Mark.
Nice to see you again. It's been a long time.
2000, Boys to Men.
2010, yeah, 10 years ago.
Yeah, 2010, yeah. That's right.
I was on a call last night with Boys to Men USA, and I wish they would make it international so you all would have been there. But they were just talking about how they're going into the schools for the virtual I groups and stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. For the school going age, Frank,
So what?
do they go into the schools with the virtual eye groups for the boys of school going age?
Yes. Yes, we've been in schools working with boys until the COVID. And so then the school year ended, and now it's a new school year, and we've been trying to figure out how to get back in there. And so the schools are just now, I mean, they don't know from one week to the next to have classes, to stay on virtual. So finally, they've let us start a couple of groups in the schools, and we're doing it with Microsoft Teams. For some reason, they don't like Zoom, so they use Microsoft Teams. And yeah, so it's been really interesting to learn a new way to engage with teenagers and hold their attention on a screen, with little squares. So everybody was talking about the ways that they're doing it. In fact, I have a question on, and I don't want to take away from the stories, but at the end of the classes in school and at the end of the virtual eye group, we were trying to do a POW, only we have to do a silent POW because we don't know who's in the room with these boys when they're at their homes on their computers. So I asked if there was an alternate that we could do, something else besides a POW. And nobody had any suggestions. That was the first point. The second point was they all said that since they went on virtual, they stopped doing the rituals at the beginning and the end of the boys' classes in the schools. They just sort of drifted away from it, you might say. So it was a major point of bringing back the rituals to the boys on the school classes.
Okay. Thanks, Frank. So before we drift too far away from the stories, anybody else want to say something at this point? Or do you want to go home and just let it begin to percolate?
I want to digest it and then come back and ask you 100 questions next time.
Okay. So I like yourself, Frank, my bladder is telling me I've got to make a visit. So if everybody's in agreement, I think we're going to close the session here. And we'll see you next week, Thursday at 7. At 7, for those people who didn't make it at 7, try to get here at 7, then you get the full thing.
That's 12 o'clock for me.
So good night and thank you, and we'll talk again.